Good morning, everyone. Welcome to All Souls Unitarian Church. My name is Greg Sanders, and I am the music director here at All Souls, but I'm also serving as our technical director during our COVID services while we're online only. Thank you for joining us today. We're happy to have you. And I'm here just to give you a few quick pointers if you need any help in figuring out how to make this whole thing happen. Number one, we ask that you remain muted throughout the service. That's our best way to be able to hear the people that we want to hear from. So watch out for that. Don't make me mute you. I will, but if I have to, and I don't like doing that. Also, we advise that you watch the service in speaker view. We do a slide deck at the same time as we hear from speakers, and you'll want to be able to see that information as well as see the person who's talking. However, for those of you who are a little bit more socially minded, you're welcome to also enter the gallery view and see all of our fellow visitors and congregants that are joining us today. Finally, we invite you to engage in the chat throughout the service. It's a common place for people to share feelings, thoughts, emotions. They also happen to, we put links there for you that you might want to access throughout the service. And it's a great way to spend some time with each other virtually while we're going through the service. Finally, we invite you to stick around at the end of our service for a virtual coffee hour, where we place you in smaller groups for you to have a chance to spend time in fellowship. Thank you again for joining us today. We're happy to welcome our visiting guest minister, Reverend Jenny Barrington, and she has our opening words today. Thank you for being with us, Jenny, and we'll give it over to you.
Thank you, Greg. Good morning and welcome. My name is the Reverend Jenny Barrington, and I'm delighted and honored to lead worship with you this morning. I love Indiana and Unitarian Universalist congregations in Indiana. I have served as the interim minister for our congregations in South Bend, Fort Wayne, and Terre Haute. But this morning, I'm joining you live from lovely Worcester, Ohio. This is not a virtual background. It's real. Actually, a couple of weeks ago, I tried to do a virtual background. I was just experimenting. And I learned that you have to have a green screen. And since I didn't have a green screen, I ended up looking like I'd only gone partway through the transporter in Star Trek Next Generation. So we've all had a lot to learn, and we're all just learning as we go. I am here in lovely Worcester, Ohio, because I serve as the interim minister of the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Wayne County, Ohio. Our worship service this morning is about practicing nonviolence and about peaceful protest. And our opening words are the words of Louisa Teish. She wrote, "There are times when I look at what human history has been and I say, oh, okay, there have always been people like us who get a momentum started and then it dies down and nothing becomes of it. And then it's 100 years or so before those thoughts are resurrected. But there's this little voice in my ears that insists I continue. It insists that something really important is happening here, something that is going to have an effect for years, something that is going to make a significant change in the world."
Good morning. I'm Diane Kennedy, and I will be serving as your worship associate this morning. And I'll warn you, one of the cats here at the house is being particularly active today. So Floyd may be assisting me. I'm just not real sure where he's going to show up. All Souls is an inclusive congregation where we do our best to live the elements of our covenant. We celebrate the inherent worth of each other, the world, our environment, and we do our best to put love in action by forming community, helping those less fortunate, and working to aid the environment. We will be having Reverend Jenny this morning talk about practicing nonviolence. And one of the things that she brought to mind in her opening words were the words of one of my professors at Ball State, and frankly, I don't remember which one, which was that he did the activism that he did, not because necessarily he thought it would make any changes, but because it was what he had to do to live with himself. And so maybe our change that we cause is small, so small we can't even see it, but we may still need to stand up and do what we do just to live with ourselves. This morning, our chalice will be lit by Teddy Rayhill. Please join him as he lights the chalice and reads our covenant.
Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. To dwell together in peace, to see the truth in love, and to help one another. This is our covenant.
So pleased to see you all here this morning, having shared in your covenant. Thank you, Teddy. Fellow I knew in a congregation I served many years ago died just a couple of days ago, and I went back and was thinking of him. He and I and some others were part of a group of people that started a congregation back in the 1990s. Jim was always very surprised. He said, "I can't believe I'm part of a church. I don't even have a spirituality." But Jim was so deeply passionate about life, so passionate that when a terrible hurricane swept over Florida, he went down there to live in order to help people who had suffered down there. When he got back, he talked a bit about how difficult it had been to be there. Lack of fresh water, difficulty sometimes getting food, sleeping in tent for weeks on end. Frances was a member of that congregation as well, another co-founder, and she asked him as he was talking about it, "Well, Jim, why do you do it?" And he said, "I do it because it feels good." Some weeks later, we had our annual pledge campaign for that congregation. We were, as we do here, we were asking each other to pledge support to our congregation for the year ahead. Jim was struggling with giving money to a church just as he was struggling with not only being a member of a church, but being a co-founder of a church. Frances said to him when he was musing about, "I'm not sure about this," she said, "Jim, give until it feels good." Jim laughed at that and had no trouble understanding what she meant. I hope you will do the same. All Souls is running its pledge campaign now. I hope you will give until it feels good. Your congregation does important ministry with each other to Indianapolis, to the world.
We are gentle, angry people.
I find that hymn was an interesting lead in to my reflection because I've never thought of myself as particularly gentle. But in musing over the topic of nonviolence, I realized that I had had very few episodes of violence in my life. Now, part of that is because I was an only child and didn't have any siblings to fight with. And I can only remember two events that I would characterize as physically violent. I think they were both in third grade. One time, a girl pushed her desk back so that it pinched my hand between her desk and mine. And another time on the school bus ride home, a boy on the school bus stabbed me with a pencil, and I still have that pencil lead in my arm. But those are, very few events, and I certainly have never encountered violence in terms of standing up for social justice. I don't know that I've done much of anything that's contributed to social justice. It's one thing to recognize the aspects of myself that have continuing racism in them and understanding where I fit in the racist system of America. But it's another thing to try to get other people to change themselves, especially when some members of the nation don't think change is necessary or desirable. Perhaps today, after the sermon, we will all have a better idea of how to bring about social justice while being actively nonviolent. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sarah Cannon, and for those who might not know me, I'm our Director of Children's and Community Programming here at All Souls. And I warned everybody this morning during the Makerspace that I found out some new stuff today that made me feel like my head exploded. So I'm very excited to share this story with you this morning. We have a guest minister today, as you might have noticed, which is always so exciting. And she's going to talk about resistance, which we know is a very important topic. So I found out something very interesting about resistance this week, and it has to do with Jesus. Some of you might know a little bit about Jesus already. He's very important to Christianity, and Unitarianism and Universalism both started as Christian religions. Whether we believe he's the actual Son of God or an ordinary human who was very wise and caring, we often study him as one example of how to behave. So, I have never told you this before, but Jesus kind of reminds me of Mary Poppins. I don't know if you ever noticed this, but Mary Poppins could be super cranky, and so could Jesus sometimes. He was a good man, a kind man, but he was not always an easy man. He did not have a lot of patience for nonsense. He could be sharp with people. If you've ever noticed this about Jesus, some of the advice he gave us when he was alive is sort of surprising. It can sound like he's saying that if other people want to hurt us, we should let them because we're nice. That it's more important to be good than to be physically safe. And that always confused me. So I was interested to learn that we might actually be misunderstanding some of what Jesus said. So I want to call your attention to a very famous speech he gave. Today we call it the Sermon on the Mount. Some of you learned about the Sermon on the Mount this year in Spirit Play. So, one saying that comes from this sermon is the phrase, turn the other cheek. What Jesus actually says is, but I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. Was Jesus saying that you should let somebody hit you 2 times? Turns out maybe not. You see, a scholar named Walter Wink got curious about this. He was trying to picture it probably the same way you are now. About 90% of people in the world are right-handed. So you're probably picturing somebody hitting or punching with their right hand. But think about this for a second. Here's my right hand. Where's your right cheek? Can you touch it? That's right. We're on Zoom and we're facing each other. So it's on the opposite side from my right hand. As any kid can tell you, one of the trickiest things about learning your left from your right is that when a person is facing you, you're mirror images of each other. So how are you going to hit someone's right cheek with your right hand? Not with the front of it, with the back. Now, hitting someone with the back of your hand, and this was true in Jesus's time, is an insult. It's a way of demonstrating that they aren't as important as you, that you are in control and they are not. It's a way of telling them to get back in line and obey you. Now, imagine that you hit someone on the right cheek with the back of your left hand. If they turn the other cheek, like Jesus said, there's really no way to hit them with the back of your hand again, not on that side of their face. Their nose is in the way, their cheek's at the wrong angle. No, if you were going to hit them a second time, you couldn't insult them by backhanding them again. This time, you'd have to use the palm of your hand or your fist. And doing either of those things would mean admitting that the person was your equal. Jesus wasn't saying you should let yourself get hit. He was saying that when someone powerful was oppressing you, fighting back physically might get you really hurt. But there was a nonviolent way to shift power in that moment, to put that person in a situation where they either had to back down or admit something that they didn't want to admit. So that's one clever thing. Here's another one. In that same sermon, Jesus also said, if anyone wants to sue you and take your coat, give your cloak as well. It sounds like he's saying to be extra nice to people who are taking things away from you. But again, we have to look more closely. You see, back then, wealthy Romans were trying to take land away from people in Palestine, where Jesus was at the time. And the best way to do that was to lend them money when they needed it, but then charge them so many fees and so much interest that they couldn't possibly afford to pay it back. And then the Romans would say, well, then I'll just take your land and all your stuff instead. Now, here's the trick. If you gave someone your coat and then you gave them whatever you were wearing under it too, well, you'd be naked. People didn't walk around naked in ancient Palestine any more than they do today. And at that time and in that culture, the person who was supposed to be most embarrassed in that situation was not the naked person. It was the person who was looking or who had caused them to be naked. Do you see how Jesus turned the tables again? He's not saying, give all your stuff away just to be nice. What he's really saying is, you know these wealthy people are taking advantage of you. They're setting you up to fail so they can take all your stuff away. So make it really clear what's going on. Don't let them pretend to be nice people. Let bystanders ask, why doesn't that person have any clothes on? Who took that person's clothes? Again, it's nonviolent, but it's powerful. There's one more example, and this one might be my favorite. The last thing Jesus said in this part of his sermon was, if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go also the 2nd mile. And people talk about going the extra mile all the time. We use it to say, do your absolute best job. Do more than you have to. Show that you care about your work. But at the time of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, this meant something very different. You see, Roman soldiers were allowed to grab anybody at any time to help them with work that needed to be done. And the most common thing they made people do was carry their heavy packs of equipment when the army was moving from one place to another. Now, there was supposed to be a limit to this. They weren't allowed to ask anyone to travel more than 1 mile from where they found them. Soldiers could get in pretty big trouble if they broke that rule. But It was still very disrespectful of a person's basic human rights to expect them to drop whatever they were doing with no warning and serve you. And that's why this is my favorite, because this was so tricky of Jesus. At the end of a mile, the soldier knows he can't keep you anymore. He knows he could get in serious trouble if he does. And instead of giving his pack back to him so he can find the next poor, unfortunate person who has to carry it, you say, "Don't worry about it. I've got this." Confusing to the soldier. It's also worrying because what if his commanding officer sees? All of a sudden, instead of ordering you to carry his pack, the Roman soldier is begging you to give it back in front of everybody. I wonder if it made the people who were watching laugh. Obviously, light bulbs did not exist when Jesus was alive, and this is sort of smart alecky of me, but I think it's appropriate because it turns out Jesus was also super smart alecky. He knew that the people he was preaching to couldn't resist by fighting. They were outnumbered and the Romans were very powerful. But he taught them nonviolent ways to resist that forced their oppressors and other people who were watching to acknowledge them as people. As we think about the importance of protest and resistance in our own communities, let's make sure we think back to the lessons of the Sermon on the Mount. Thank you.
One day, when the glory comes, it will be ours, it will be ours. Oh, one day.
Good morning, everyone. Every week we do our joys and sorrows section of the service, and this is a time that we take to specifically lift up those in our community that are experiencing hardship or needing just a little bit more community attention, and also to celebrate with those in our community who are experiencing joy. This week, I'd like to lift up both Jane Alexander and Jane Cook. I want to make sure I don't mix up the Janes. So Jane Alexander has had surgery and is recovering well, and her information is in the order of service if you'd like to send condolences. Jane Cook's father has unfortunately passed away, and we would be happy to send her some words of condolence and let her know that her community is here, and her information is also in the order of service. Additionally, Allison Cole's father passed away 2 weeks ago, and lifting her up with good thoughts would be much appreciated. Also, a newer member of our community, Elizabeth Farr, has stage 3 kidney disease, and she is just recently wanted to share this with our community. Her biopsy is happening this Monday, and she would really appreciate some positive words and positive vibes sent her way. She's declined to have her information in the order of service, but just asks that you keep her in your hearts and thoughts. And that's what we usually do for joys and sorrows, right? Is I list some things that we can keep in mind to sorrow and mourn together. And just as mourning is a spiritual discipline, just as grief is a thing that we can do in community together, so is joy. And I'm trying to get better about this. I'm trying to make sure that in my spiel about the things that are weighing on the hearts of our community, that I also celebrate the things that are happening in our community. And so this morning, I want to lift up a specific joy from this morning, which is our adult forum this morning. And it was so well attended. Thank you all for coming. We had a guest speaker, Malachi Carter, who came to talk to us a little bit about being an ally, being a white ally in the fight for anti-racism, and what it means for him as a Black man in the church to use language that exists along a binary of light and dark. There's also all kinds of other conversation that happened, but I just wanted to share with the congregation what a joy this morning's adult forum was. What a joy it was to gather with 10 of you, 15 of you, and to hear so much vulnerability, so much real questioning about why is it not okay to be colorblind? Why is it, what are we really trying to say? And just so much softness. And I just want to share that joy with the congregation. Malachi called me after Adult Forum ended, and he said, I know you're very protective of your white people, and I can see why you love them. And so thank you for that experience this morning.
Thank you, Nazreen. This morning, we are thinking with loving kindness of all those in our congregation or known and loved by our congregation who are in a time of transition, loss, uncertainty, or fear. May their fears be assuaged, their minds put at ease, and their hearts be comforted. We are mindful of all of the joys, concerns, milestones, and remembrances which remain silent in our hearts. Let us join our hearts together now in a moment of silence in contemplation on the joys and concerns of the day. Blessed be.
When I think about some of the rough patches I've gone through in my life, I'm so grateful that I've had the ability to sing songs of the old school myself in at times. And it goes a little like this.
These words by the late Representative John Lewis were written shortly before his death and published in the New York Times on the day of his funeral. He wrote, I heard the voice of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on an old radio. He said, each of us has a moral obligation to stand up, and speak out. And each generation must do its part to help build what we call the beloved community, a nation and a world at peace with itself. Ordinary people with extraordinary vision can redeem the soul of America by getting in what I call good trouble, necessary trouble. Voting and participating in the democratic process are key. The vote is the most powerful nonviolent change agent you can have in a democratic society. You must use it because it is not guaranteed. You can lose it. Though I may not be here with you, I urge you to answer the highest calling of your heart and stand up for what you truly believe. In my life, I have done all that I can to demonstrate that the way of peace, the way of love and nonviolence is the more excellent way. Now it is your turn to let freedom ring. When historians pick up their pens to write the story of the 21st century, let them say that it was your generation who laid down the heavy burdens of hate at last, and that peace finally triumphed over violence, over aggression, and over war. So I say to you, walk with the wind, brothers and sisters, and let the spirit of peace and the power of everlasting love be your guide. This week, I've been thinking about protests and protesting and about the question of why we protest, availing ourselves of opportunities to show up and speak out for societal change can also help us clarify who we are and what we feel called to do and be as our fullest, best selves. On this day, 56 years ago, the day that we now call Bloody Sunday, when outside of Selma, Alabama, state troopers attacked civil rights demonstrators, including John Lewis. Yet John Lewis remained committed to peaceful protest and to practicing nonviolence. We are also in the season of nonviolence, inspired by the teachings of Mohandas Gandhi. And we are at the beginning of Women's History Month. Both John Lewis and Gloria Steinem were inspired by the teachings of Mohandas Gandhi. Guidance from John Lewis and Gloria Steinem and Mohandas Gandhi can help us sustain our commitment to practicing nonviolence in violent and conflicted times. The late Representative John Lewis passed away on July 17th. His passing is a huge loss for our nation and the world. But he has left for us both the example of a life that was brave, humble, and loving, of social activism, and he's left us written and spoken words that we can look to for guidance. For John Lewis, our personal choices and our political actions are intertwined. To live a grace-filled and peaceful life is to work for brotherhood and justice, and vice versa. He believed that there are higher principles and greater truths that we can work for and benefit from, and that those higher principles and greater truths outlast the span of any one lifetime. And I have been looking to the wisdom of Gloria Steinem, who broke new ground in the fight for women's rights, and also broke new ground with the intersectionality of oppressions due to gender and race and economic class. Excuse me. Gloria Steinem's work and words had a deep influence on me when I was a little girl in the Boston area. Lots of adults, especially, but not exclusively women, were talking about her and her ideas and her advocacy for change. When I was little and the mailman came, I enjoyed going out to get the mail and bringing it into my mother. Excuse me a second. And I still recall a day when I looked through the envelopes, and one of them said that it was to Mrs. John W. Barrington. I held it up to my mother and I said, they left out your name. Why didn't they write your name on it? Your name is Judy. They made a mistake. Yes, the political activism of the 1960s and 1970s influenced me deeply. Gloria Steinem, too, believes that the personal is the political. Simply speaking up for social change is not enough. We must also examine our own experiences and values and assumptions if we are to be as effective as we can possibly be, if we are to be our fullest, best selves. John Lewis became a leader for social change at a young age, and I think it was his destiny. In honor of John Lewis's life and the commemoration of the Selma to Montgomery March, I wanted us to hear some of what he believed in his own words. And these quotes are from his book called Across That Bridge, A Vision for Change and the Future of America, which he wrote in 2012. John Lewis believed that overcoming societal repression and creating a more just world begins with personal liberation and empowerment. He wrote, "You are a light. You are the light. Never let anyone, any person, or any force dampen, dim, or diminish your light. Study the path of others to make your way easier and more abundant. Lean toward the whispers of your own heart. Discover the universal truth and follow its dictates. Release the need to hate, to harbor division, and the enticement of revenge. Release all bitterness. Hold only to love, only peace in your heart, knowing that the battle of good to overcome evil is already won. Choose confrontation wisely, but when it is your time, do not be afraid to stand up, and speak out against injustice. And if you follow your truth down the road to peace and the affirmation of love, if you shine like a beacon for all to see, then the poetry of all the great dreamers and philosophers is yours to manifest in a nation, a world community, and a beloved community that is finally at peace with itself. End of quote. John Lewis also believed that showing up and speaking up that individuals have done, have suffered for, and have even died for does make a positive difference for the greater good. He wrote, despite everything that has happened, regardless of the pain of their loss, despite all the nonviolent, peaceful warriors who suffered and sometimes fell, I never once considered giving up or giving out. I could not let myself get lost in a sea of despair because I had faith that the truth is bigger than all of humanity. The tragedy of their loss was a crisis of faith, but in that struggle, I discovered you can kill a Medgar Evers or a Jimmy Lee Jackson. You can kill 3 civil rights workers. You can bomb 4 innocent little girls in a church on a Sunday morning. You can even kill 3 of the finest leaders of the 20th century, but you cannot kill the truth they represented. The truth marches on. It is not connected to the life of any one individual. When a person dies, the dream does not die. You can kill a man, but the truth that he stood for will never die. End of quote. And this morning, I wanted to also lift up wisdom from Gloria Steinem, especially since her life of activism was grounded in Gandhian philosophy. These ideas of hers have helped me answer the question of why we protest. After she graduated from college in the 1950s, Gloria Steinem went to India. At that time, India was besieged by rioting, violence between the castes, by poverty and social unrest. In South India, she met with a group of activists working for social change through practicing nonviolence. They were led by a disciple of Gandhi named Vinoba Bhave. Gloria Steinem accompanied them as they walked from village to village, carrying only a cup, a comb, and the clothes on their backs. They would lead the villagers in meetings and talking circles. The villagers learned about what was really going on outside of their community. They developed solidarity for each other, and they continued meeting after Gloria's group moved on. They were countering the violence in the larger society through peaceful means. From living, working, walking, teaching, and listening with those activists in India, Gloria Steinem learned core principles of Gandhi's method for nonviolent social change. And those principles are, and this is from her chapter called Doing 60 in her book called Moving Beyond Words. If you do something people care about, the people will take care of you. If you want people to listen to you, you have to listen to them. If you hope people will change how they live, you have to know how they live. If you want people to see you, you have to sit down with them, eye to eye. Gloria Steinem illustrates these core principles with a story from a geology class she once took, the lesson of which she calls Listen to the Turtles. She is fond of saying, I found a mud turtle on a riverbank up by an asphalt road. A big snapping turtle, more than a foot long. I picked it up carefully and I lugged it down to the river and slipped it in. The professor saw me just as the turtle disappeared under the water. He said the turtle had been making its way to dry land for a reason, to lay its eggs, and now it was going to take that turtle months to lay them. It was a lesson I learned to apply to people a few years later, she said, in India, though I did not realize it then, when I was going from village to village with a Gandhian group of women organizers, listening to them ask people, Tell us your stories. You have lived them. You are the experts. And so I think we go to protests not just to be seen and heard, but to engage with others, to engage with people who share our views, which builds strengths and solidarity, but also to engage with people who do not share our views and to listen to them and humbly learn from them, because every person has life experiences we have not had. We go to protests to try to change unjust systems, but we should also be open to change within ourselves. I'll close this morning with a personal reflection of John Lewis's, as retold by Parker Palmer in Palmer's book, which is called Healing the Heart of Democracy. Dr. Palmer writes of his experience in March of 2011, taking part in the annual Congressional Civil Rights Pilgrimage, sponsored by the Faith and Politics Institute and led by Congressman John Lewis. Parker Palmer said, "At the end of the pilgrimage, after we had marched across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, we boarded a bus to take us to the Montgomery Airport for the flight home. By happenstance, I sat just behind John Lewis and one of his staffers, where I overheard Lewis telling a story. He said that in 1961, he and a friend were at a bus station in Rock Hill, South Carolina, when several young white men attacked and beat them with baseball bats. Lewis and his friend did not fight back, and they declined to press charges. They simply treated their wounds and went on with their civil rights work. In 2009, 48 years after that event, a white man about the same age as John Lewis walked into his office on Capitol Hill, accompanied by his middle-aged son. "Mr. Lewis," he said, "my name is Elwyn Wilson. I am one of the men who beat you in that bus station back in 1961. I want to atone for the terrible thing that I did, so I have come to seek your forgiveness. Will you forgive me?" Lewis said, "I forgave him. We embraced. He and his son and I wept, and then we talked." As Lewis came to the end of this remarkable and moving story, Parker Palmer said, he leaned back in his seat on the bus. He gazed out the window for a while as we passed through a countryside that had once been a killing ground for the Ku Klux Klan, of which Elwyn Wilson had been a member. And then he said in a very small voice, as if speaking to himself about the story that he had just told and the memories that must have been moving in him, Lewis said, "People can change. People can change." When I heard John Lewis say, "People can change, Parker Palmer said, I felt a sense of hope, not simply for them, but for me, that belief in change is possible, personal as well as societal change. That belief can keep us engaged with this endless experiment for the long haul, doing whatever we can to help democracy not only survive, but thrive." End of quote. And so I think that John Lewis and Gloria Steinem would agree that practicing nonviolence is not just about the measurable things that we say and do as individuals, though that is an essential first step. At its best, practicing nonviolence is about the timeless qualities we convey to everyone whose lives we touch. The communities of solidarity with whom we build beloved community, and to people who seem to be across a great divide from us. We can convey to others the qualities of humility, empathy, compassion, and grace. And those qualities can ripple out to people we may or may not meet in person. And one person at a time, the world is changed. Do not underestimate the influence your congregation has had on our Hoosier State, our nation, and around the globe. Indeed, that influence is immeasurable. Let it be, and amen.
Good morning again, everyone. If you take a look in the chat, you will see a link to our weekly online connection card. This gives you an opportunity to reach back to All Souls and to express interest in programming that you already see available or that you would like to see. And so a couple of things that I would like to draw your attention to this week are that, first of all, if you're thinking to yourself, darn, I missed Adult Forum, you can join one. You can also volunteer to lead one or suggest a guest speaker who might be excellent. So the connection card is a place that you can express that interest. You can also respond to today's service on resistance by joining the UUA's March Jubilee training. Some of you may know congregants who attended the first training back in January. There's another one occurring in March. So make sure you reach out if you're interested in that. If you're interested in greater service to the church and to the continued operation of the church, then you might be interested in learning more about serving on the board or just how the board operates in general. And the Butterfly Garden team is also looking for helpers. And I want to make sure I particularly point that out to some of our younger members who I know are here today and were in the makerspace with me. We were just talking about getting out into the garden. So this is a very good opportunity. I hope you'll take just a moment to fill this out now. Thank you very much.
Each week, All Souls shares part of the collection with an organization that shares our values. This week, the organization is UUSC, or Unitarian Universalist Service Committee. The committee focuses on the intersecting roots of injustice to defend rights at risk due to criminalization, systematic oppression. It supports self-determination and defends the rights of people who are displaced because of climate change, economic reasons, war, conflict, hardships, catastrophes. And it responds to humanitarian crises as partners with the people who need the aid and whose access is otherwise limited. I am glad that Reverend Barrington this morning talked about Gloria Steinem. My favorite Gloria Steinem quote is, "You can tell our values by looking at our check stubs." And I think that says a lot. Please reflect on that truth when you make your contribution today and when you think about your pledge. We will now take time for the morning offering.
If I had a hammer, I'd a hammer in the morning, I'd a hammer in the evening, all over this land. I'd a hammer out danger, I'd a hammer out a warning, I'd a hammer out love between my brothers and my sisters, all over this land. Ooh, if I had a bell, brothers and the sisters all over this land. Ooh, if I had a song, I'd sing it in the morning, I'd sing it in the evening, all over this land. and my sisters all over this land. Ooh, well, I got a hammer and I got a bell and I got a song to sing all over this land. It's a hammer of justice, it's a bell of freedom, it's a song about love between the brothers and the sisters all over this land. It's a hammer of justice, it's a bell of freedom, it's a song about love between the brothers and the sisters all over this land.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun on a new day begun, let us march on till the is won. Stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening rod, felt in the days when hope unborn had died. Yet with a steady beat, have not our weary feet come to the place for which our fathers signed. We have come over a way that with tears have been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered. Out from the gloomy past, till now we stand at last, where the white gleam of a bright star is cast. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, thou who hast by thy might led us into the light, keep us forever in the path we pray. Lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met thee, lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. Shadowed beneath thy hand, may we forever stand, true to our God, true to our native land.
Our parting words are from the book of Micah, chapter 4, verse 3. They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. But they shall all sit under their own vines and fig trees, and no one shall make them afraid. And now Nazreen has a few announcements to share with us.